Okay, so you see, the problem, she argued, is that the family is considered a private subject. A subject that is concerned to those who realize it, who make it, to the husband, to the wife, to the children, but not to the society. And what do we say? We say the family is not a private subject, but a social subject, because precisely as the Pope says, the well-being of a people, of a society, depends on the well-being of its families. The we here is the Sindacato della Famiglie, the Syndicate of Families, of the Catholic movement Comunione e Liberazione, based in Milan. And the she, who argued, is Paola Soave, who founded this association of families within CIEL. CIEL is the abbreviation of Comunione e Liberazione, in '82, and with whom I had long conversations in the spring of 2000 while doing ethnographic work within CIEL in Milan. In this paper, I will do a closer reading of the family in CIEL, as we talked about it in that interview and another set of conversations, and in relation to the other ethnographic work I did in that movement. The ethnographic and analytical work took place in the context of my doctoral dissertation, but was focused on younger, highly educated women within religious movements, Islamic and Christian movements in the European context. And in most of the conversations with the younger women, the family was not much of a subject to think and talk about. There were, of course, some references here and there about an ideal of the family, but it was not much of a burning question, and least of all for the women of CIEL compared to the other fieldworks, ethnographic work that I did. So least of all for CIEL, which might seem noteworthy in relation to prevailing ideas about women's sexuality and religious movements. But so for Paola Soave, the family was a burning question, and I hope to convey to you in this paper how and why that was the case. And it was hardly a coincidence, I guess, that Paola did not fit the profile of most of the other women whom I interviewed, and as I already mentioned, who were younger women. And she, in fact, was the mother of one of the young women, of one of my respondents. And I had been referred to her by several of the young women, in particularly the moment that they understood that I was interested in questions of gender and sexuality. Almost as if they meant to suggest, we don't really know, we are not really women, we don't really know about these women's things, better talk to Paola, the head of the Syndicate of Families. And in some cases this was actually more than a suggestion that I felt was going on. In some cases it was explicit, like the woman and friend who was my informant in the movement. She felt compelled at some point to tell me, after seeing that I was struggling to get these conversations going about sexual difference in gender and sexuality, she told me, Sarah, you have to understand, you're not understanding something. Those things are not important. They do not play within our movement. And also there was a discourse, as Gia just mentioned, about the outside world and the movement. So they play in the outside world. You put on the television, you look at advertisements, and you see how it plays. But within our movement, it does not play. And talking about herself, she added, and this is at the age of 25 and in the midst of her wedding preparations, I'm only beginning to grasp now how the concept of woman might apply to me. So I was interested both in how gender, sexuality and family, at least on the surface, were not burning questions for all the younger women I talked to, and how it became a burning question for somebody like Paola. Okay, so I feel that I have to give you some background about CIEL in order to make the story comprehensible.
Can I have a sound check at this point? Is it okay? Yeah?
Yeah? Okay. But it's kind of... Okay, I'm going to just rush through this part. I feel I have to do it, but it feels like eating time.
Don't.
Okay. CIEL is a movement of Catholic renewal and reconstruction in post-war Italy, which in a way has two modes of birth. So the movement that came to be known as CIEL came out of a Milan-based experience by the Catholic youth movement Gioventù Studentesca, which began at the Lyceum in Milan, or at least the part that became CIEL began at the Lyceum in Milan under the leadership or the charisma of the Lyceum's chaplain called Giussani. Now Giussani had been teaching at the theology faculty, but after meeting during a trip a bunch of young people whom he found terribly ignorant about Catholic Church, he demanded to be transferred to a high school to start, in order to devote himself to the work of reconstruction of Christian presence among students. So this is in 45. And Italian society in, no, sorry, this is in 54. Okay. Italian society in the 50s is usually regarded as a deeply Catholic society. So what precisely was Giussani talking about when he talked about this terrible ignorance of the Catholic Church? To give more background, the Italian Catholic Church in post-war period had to defend itself from three main threats, let's say. Marxism, demands of the ending of the concordat, which is, I won't go into that in particular, let's say the secular contract of Italian society defining the relationship between the church and the state, and a more general sense of the secularization of society. And in fact, the Italian church defended itself against those three, let's say, threats with remarkable success. The concordat was renewed, a full-scale mobilization of the faithful in the parishes took place against the Communist Party, and effectively the Italian Communist Party was isolated. And the secularization of society is precisely on the point of this general sense of the secularization of society that Giussani conceived, let's say, a different account or genealogy of the Catholic character of Italian society, which he claimed represented at the time merely a facade. So there was a kind of a secular a Catholic facade behind which a radicalization of secular culture was taking place. This occurred, according to Giussani, on three levels. The wide participation to mass and religious holidays were becoming a cultural trait, a habit, a culture of Italian society, and not an expression of faith. The strong political power of the Christian Democratic Party had begun to weaken its connection to the church. And the mass participation within Catholic associations reflected so youth movements and other type of associations reflected an increased focus on numbers while letting the content slip by, resulting in a reduction of faith to moralism. So this is Giussani's perspective on the secularization of society. So young people might still profess to be Catholic, but he concluded it did not influence the way in which they were making judgments and decisions about the world and their lives. So his counter-project targeted this secularization. And in one sense, a focus against Marxism might have been a shortcut or an easy way, or at least would have given him or his movement a wider set of alliances within a context of Cold War and post-fascist Italy at the time. But despite Giussani's preoccupation with what he considered the beginnings of a Marxist hegemony within the Italian intellectual production, he was very keen on locating the problem not within Marxism, but within the shared roots of Marxism and liberalism, what he called Enlightenment culture. So the problem here, the problem is secularization of society and a hegemonic Enlightenment culture. So the early history of the movement, still called GS, or Juventus Studentesca at the time, was marked by two crucial events. First of all, a key moment within the Catholic Church, namely the Second Vatican Council, and that is considered as reflecting the Church's struggle and negotiation with a changing and modernizing society in the spirit of the so-called aggiornamento, kind of updating of Catholic faith. So GS positioning vis-à-vis the Council, which is often interpreted as a movement towards a progressive Catholic Church, a progressive church, was marked by deep tensions. On the one hand, updating and renewal of faith, of Catholic faith in contemporary and the modern world, had inspired Giussani's movement from the very beginning. And Giussani's, or the movement of GS, Juventus Studentesca's critique of some of the basic organizational principles within the Church had created a number of tensions with the Vatican. For instance, GS refused the focus on parishes, which is to say the territorial building blocks of the Catholic Church, and experimented and argued that there should be much more openness towards new deterritorializations going on in contemporary society and establishing religious communities within those conditions of contemporary life, that is to say, within the school, within university, within working place, which created all kind of tensions with the parish-based hierarchy, in which, of course, the bishops have a certain power, or have a lot of power. A second example is G.S. dismissal of the so-called personalized treatment principle that characterized the organization of the Catholic field at the time. Personalized treatment structures Catholic associations at the time and still up today in terms of gender, age, profession, and so on. So having separate sections and approaches for what were identified as different groups. And I think you might have the examples in your mind of, for instance, the Catholic Women's Workers Association. So that kind of structuring of the fields in terms of gender, age, profession. Again, GS defined that way of organizing, and in particular proposed a kind of gender mixture, gender mingling of the groups, of its own groups, which was very controversial within the Catholic Church before the Vatican Council, but normalized after the Council. So such instances and conflicts provided Giussani with the confidence to assert that instead of being in contradiction to the Council, many themes of his movement were in fact a kind of forerunner to the Council. But of course the fact remains that many did consider Giussani's movement in contradiction with the Vatican Council, and in particular in the first decade after its closing of the Council, when the text and everything that came out of the Council was interpreted in more progressive ways, and post-conciliar became synonymous for progressive. Now this kind of came to an end with the previous Pope, which now I forgot his Pope name, Karol Wojtyla being elected into, what is it, Pope? John II, of course, yeah. And so the progressive interpretation of the Second Vatican Council ended there, and at that moment, indeed, what then had become GL was very much aligned with the interpretations of the Council. So a second important moment, and then I go back to the Syndicative Families. But the second moment which has shaped this movement is when Giussani left GS in '65, transferring to the Catholic University of Milan, the so-called Cattolica, in order, as he puts it, to follow up the ecclesial experience of all those former members of the more youth and student, as in pupil movement that he started. As they moved on, going on into higher education, he wanted to move with them and follow up the ecclesial experience, as he puts it. So when he left the youth movement, GS, the leading group of GS split almost numerically into, between followers of Giussani and those who were labeled by the followers of Giussani as the little ideologues. That is to say, those increasingly invested in political activism. And at that time, so '65, GS became a cauldron of debate and discussion at La Cattolica. The return of sponsored missionaries from Brazil, summer work camps in the poverty-stricken areas of Calabria, and recreation projects among the children of the Milanese hinterland. All of those experiences, initially promoted out of the spirit of Caritas, excited so-called communist sympathies among students in the context, of course, in the broader context of a growing dissent among Catholic intellectuals and organizations in particular, and within Italian society in general. So in that context, humanist and populist ideas linked up with Marxist theories, and evangelism took on the form of overtly political activism. And within an atmosphere that was pregnant with political dissent and revolt, La Cattolica became a significant site of struggle. And it was in fact occupied by its students in the autumn of '67. The occupation sent a shockwaves through Italian society, that this would happen precisely in a Catholic university. And the university authorities reacted strongly. The police was called in, and the campus at Sant'Ambrogio became a scene for battle and violence. So the occupations, and this is several authors who argue this, set the ball rolling for the student revolts of 68, which in a sense mark a watershed between industrial and post-industrial societies and had a particular strong counterpart in Italy. Now this is how the internal crisis or conflict, and let's say about different views on Christianity, looked like from Giussani's point of view and his followers. Since the mid-60s, a number of the young followers of the movement began to put all their hopes into action and the organizing of society, and not in, and I quote, the gesture of God entering society. Their emphasis was on the effective and practical engagement on an approach to social problems that was based on moral demands. Thus, all hope for mankind lay in its capacity to act, end of quote. So here is, I think I should really cut on this, but what I want to convey is a sense of a radical split in a movement that for a couple of decades, 2 decades, was functioning together. Let's say in the middle of the 60s, a radical split in which these two different views on Christianity and Catholicism were departed from each other and were totally crystallized as two different things. One becoming liberation theology, basically, and giving rise to movements such as Catholics for Socialism, and the other becoming what then got the name of Comunione e Liberazione, and that needed to distinguish itself from this liberation theology, and that distinguished itself from it precisely in terms of stressing what Giussani calls the Christian fact. Because the political character of liberation theology, the followers of Giussani considered, led to the tragic disappearance of the religious dimension, and all agency was given to mankind in yet another killing of God. This is the way that the story is told in GL. Okay, and at the same time, just the last note about this history, Giussani is very explicit about the fact that the events of 68 taught the movement Comunione e Liberazione a good number of lessons. And I quote now, "It drew attention to the absence of a theory of transition between a society based on division and profit and one on an authentic ecclesiastical experience. And it called for the need of such a theory with the same type of internal coherence as we can see in Marxism." End of quote. And I mean, this would be a subject of another paper, basically, but there's, in Giussani's writings and interviews, there's a number of moments where he refers very explicitly to the theoretical and experiential patrimony of Marxism in a way that, of course, very clearly he takes a counter-Marxist position, but in a way of taking on the lessons from Marxism. This is very explicit. One of the authors he will always mention in his lists of thinkers and especially theologists that have influenced him and his thinking and his theology very much would be, for instance, Antonio Gramsci. He's always one of his intellectual, let's say, inspirations. Okay, so then in '71, at one of the conferences of the so-called, by then, adult groups of the youth movement, GS, the name Comunione e Liberazione was taken on, and the movement as we know it today really started in the beginning of the 70s there. Okay, back to the Syndicate of Families. So by the time when Paola Suave feels the urge to establish the Family Syndicate in '82, so let's say a decade after the movement properly known as GL was founded, there is a history of a couple of decennia of experience and conflicts to look back to. And the social background against which the Family Syndicate emerged, that of Italian post-industrial society, was marked by a predominance of mononuclear families, largely replacing the former extended family. And the family transformation included, and I mean, this is a familiar history, I guess, this is a shared history for many West European countries, included smaller families, less and less marriages, more unmarried couples living together, a modest rise of separations and divorce, a modest rise of children born out of wedlock, a general trend to a convergence of the smaller model of the nuclear family. And surveys suggest that that among the majority of Italians, the preferred model is precisely the two-parent, two-child nuclear family. The urge to establish the syndicate of families needs to be situated, as I said before, with respect to a number of conflicts, and some of them pertain to these trends within general trends within Italian society. And so the syndicate positioned itself with a certain type of militancy, and I think the name itself, which is a consciously chosen name, already hints to that as a syndicate, so with a certain militancy, with a twofold purpose. First of all, to defend family rights vis-à-vis the state, on the one hand, and then on the other hand, to support families in developing a network and a number of services that can be organized in a more collective way. So the first aim, the defense of the rights of families, is grounded in the vision that if families have a number of tasks to fulfill, and I will come back to that, that part is clear. The task of a family is reproduction and raising children. So if they have a number of tasks to fulfill, such duties engender rights. Okay, I'm checking on the time. I'm going to just...
We have ample time. So
ample time?
Coffee break is at 3:30 and until 5. So.
Okay, so then I will just do, I mean, it's kind of rephrasing what I just said, but it's with the words of, in this case, Paula, so it's kind of giving the flesh of this discourse, or more fleshy insight into this discourse. So I quote her. In relation to these tasks that the family develops and has to learn to develop, which rights can be obtained in the confrontation with the state and with the institutions? We say that since the family is a range of relations that are fundamental to society, because if that was not the case, who would bring children into the world, who would take responsibility, who would raise them, the whole social tissue would fall apart. And in relation to those duties that the family develops, to those tasks, rights are born to the family in confrontation to the state. That is, the single, so the single person, the person who is not in the family, the single, precisely because he doesn't assume the same responsibilities, he doesn't carry the weight of the future of society, does not have these rights. End of quote. Such rights, Paola argues, are not recognized in Italy, in Italian society. And very concretely, when I'm asking for examples in the interview, very concretely she refers to family allowances or a system of tax deductions for every child, which are, compared to other Western European countries, rather low in Italy. Yet the struggle of the syndicate of families is not to be reduced merely on that financial or economical level, a demand for family allowances, which in this case, how the demand is concretely made within the syndicate is taking into account the number of children, so like a high rise for every subsequent child. So this is not to be reduced merely to that financial or economical level. It is also a struggle for legal recognition. And indeed, the very manner in which the family is put on the agenda and is talked about, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to give you some of the quotes to convey that feeling of the sense of that discourse. So the way it is talked about already does what the potential legal recognition would aim for, namely considering the family as a subject of its own, with its own subjectivity. So this point of departure sits uncomfortably within a number of things, within feminist frameworks, but for a moment I want to focus on how it sits uncomfortably within a liberal notion, or a liberal contemporary liberal society, shaped by various processes of individualization, including struggles for women's emancipation that have elaborated or relied on strategies of individualization, precisely in confrontation with the welfare state. So individual claims in confrontation with the welfare state, claims that go to an individual and precisely not to a family or a household. And I want also, and that part, of course, this part of the story is perhaps a familiar one, or at least one that you would have expected when I announced you that I will talk about families within within Catholic movement. But now I also want to show that it sits uncomfortably, this point of departure, within the movement itself, within Chia itself, and that it is important to see or the conflicts, or at least the tensions within the movement that gave rise to the family syndicate. So Paola was clear in stating that the syndicate was needed because the movement had, to a large extent, failed to attend to the family. And more than that, not only to attend to the ideal of a family, but to attend to the realities of concrete families. Now, how is this possible? As I've just suggested, from a secular mindset, this comes rather unexpectedly, because surely a Catholic movement with a neo-traditionalist outlook, or however you call them, integrist, neo-traditionalist, fundamentalist outlook on gender and sexuality, must be all about the family, right? Well, not really. I found this not precisely to be the case within Comunione e Liberazione. And taking into account the origins as a youth movement, and taking into account the fact that its charismatic leader was a priest, perhaps it does not come totally as a surprise then when I tell you that one of the central notions within the movement and within its theology is virginity. So a straightforward emphasis on virginity was very clear, let's say, in the importance ascribed to a life of celibacy. And of course, this is the importance ascribed to priesthood and to existing religious orders. So within the movement, there was a certain, encouragement for young men to consider priesthood, and for young men and women to consider entering existing orders, existing religious orders. But for more of them, because that of course remained a minority, for more of them it meant a particular mode of consecrated life for lay people that is developed within the movement, and that is very strong within the movement, and which is called Memoris Domini. Now, Memoris Domini are adults, young people can, as long as you're a student, as long as you do not have a professional life, as long as you do not have a job, you cannot enter the Memoris Domini. So, Memoris Domini are adults who have taken a number of vows, including a vow of chastity, and live together in small communities, same-sex communities, sharing a communal life structured by prayers and hours of silence, while continuing a full-time professional life in the so-called world outside. But now we're moving a bit further, because in fact the notion of virginity was extended even beyond that towards life in general. And I'm now just going to give you a quote from one of the many books with Chia theology, and especially one of those books where theology is combined with a more practical approach to how one should live a religious life in modern society. Okay, and I quote, "Why enter the Memoris Domini, or the Fraternity of San Giuseppe," which is one of the religious orders, "and why marry? For the same motive inaugurated by God in the beginning of the world. It is not good that man is alone. I want to make him support similar to him. To live holiness as a supreme law of the dynamic of everyday life in a company guided to its destiny." End of quote. Chia, I mean, I cannot really explain everything. Chia has a certain particular type of language which you can say lots about, and which indeed people within the movement go on reasoning about. It's a very kind of condensed, exalted language. Anyway, so the notion of virginity within Chiel discourse was not centered on a concrete and moral understanding of an injunction of premarital sex, let's say, or sex outside of a marital bond, although clearly that was part and parcel of it. But rather, virginity within Chiel was to be considered as a more general mode of conceiving the religious subject's relationship to Christ and to her or his own body, and to the community. So one would say it's a mode of embodiment and relationality of a pious subjectivity, a mode of relating to man, relating to a woman, relating to Christ, as well as relating to oneself and one's body. And another point on which I will not elaborate here, but I do want to mention a whole set of conversations that I had about saints, within particularly one of the young women, who at some point came up to me and said, Sarah, if you really want to understand what is at stake here for women within GL, because this was still the period in which I was desperately trying to bring gender, sexual difference, sexuality in all of the conversations, and meeting with all this resistance of young women not really wanting to talk about it, not really knowing what to say, not really considering themselves to be interpreted by the notion of woman. And at some point she came up to me and said, if you really want to understand, you have to understand saints. You have to look into the question of saints. You have to understand female saints. Or, I mean, saints in general, that there's a number of important gender dynamics going on in sainthood within the Catholic Church. So, I mean, I will not elaborate it on here because it takes me much further, but it is that what I mean when I'm saying that virginity in this case is linked to, or is understood as a mode of embodiment and relationality of a pious subjectivity, relating to God, to community, to the self, to her own body. And in this mode of relationality and embodiment, so shaped by this particular kind of autonomy that emerges in a certain kind of submission to God, and this refers back to the saint discussions of the autonomy that a saint can gain in a total submission to God, and autonomy vis-a-vis human relationships. So, in the tension between this particular kind of autonomy emerging in the submission of God on the one hand, and the strong emphasis on community and communal life on the other, in that tension, the notion of community is actually reconstructed, or is made, is redone. And so in that sense, GL does not only represent a reconstruction of faith, so Giussani's own purpose of reconstructing the Christian presence in the modern world and modern institutions. It is not only a reconstruction of faith, but it is a reconstruction of community. And in that sense, one could also say of new families. So coming back to family. One more point before I come back to family. What needs to be pushed out in all of this? Now I have to... Okay. What needs to be pushed out of this reconstruction of community and this reconstructed relationality and embodiment of the subject in relationship to God and to Christ and to its own body is sexuality. Okay, then I'm since I need to look at time, I'm just going to mention it and hope, and I probably guess that we are coming back to it in the discussion on maybe to sexuality. But going back to Paula, who was a woman in her early mid-50s, dressed up and wearing too much makeup, if you would ask me, a bit flamboyant, a hint of a diva style. Much was actually conveyed in her body language, and especially when she was talking about the conflicts or tensions within the movement, and perhaps did not want to, or was a little bit reluctant to put it all into words, then for sure her body was talking. Or she just wanted to underscore some of the points with her body. So in that kind of flamboyant way, she would look at me and say, virginity, consecrated life, all good and well, but what do they know? I mean, he's a priest, and I don't need to draw him a picture. What does he know about families? And she also took easily pride, or had a certain heroic posture and pride into the work that she was doing, almost positioning herself as this Catholic woman warrior. So then she would go on and add, we have children to raise, we have young mothers that need support, we have young families that need support, we have women who need all the support they can get to be workers and mothers, we have children and families with problems. Keep on talking about virginity. So with all the emphasis on virginity, the spiritual and material catering that went on in GL to those living a consecrated form of life. Paula and other women in families considered that families had been left too much alone within the movement. And the metaphor of family in the church in general, and the family metaphor within the movement, the fact that there's a number of fraternities within the movement, all those family metaphors of which the movement was crowded in one sense, you could say, and all the renewed imaginaries and practices of community that in one sense was a new sense of family, at least to many of the young people participating in it. All of that stood in contrast with the concrete realities of families within the movement. This was Paula's analysis of the failure within the movement in relation to families. And so, under her leadership, families self-organized. Families in Milan are very isolated, Paula argues. They are not only mostly mononuclear, but they are also often new migrations to the city. So families that find themselves in the city without a longer family history in that city and cannot count on extended families or grandmothers or mothers to help out with some of the care. So the syndicate effectively constructed a network of families, connecting them between different apartments and apartment blocks and neighborhoods all throughout the city. Such a network offers a number of services, like small nursery schools, babysitter service, mobilizing elderly people who are still capable to mind young children, but who might not have grandchildren of their own, with young families who do not have their grandparents in Milan, and effectively reconstructing intergenerational and extended family beyond biological kinship. And Paula, for one, was not somebody who spent much time deploring a general trend towards small nuclear families, including a critique within the movement, a kind of very present critique of what is called the bourgeois family, meaning basically the mononuclear family. She's not somebody who spends much time deploring that, but she's somebody who kind of pulls up the sleeve and starts organizing a true family syndicate in that sense. Then the other point to make, before going on to conclude, is that, of course, the social and political context in which this is happening is one of a minimal welfare state. Not only because there never was much of a welfare state in Italy to begin with, but also given neoliberal conditions in which what remains of social security is rapidly being dismantled. And the relationship between CL and the neoliberal capitalist regime of our times is an ambiguous one. There's lots of critique going on, there's also complicity going on. Again, that would be something for another paper, but it is also a relationship of critique, also of complicity. And in that sense, it's interesting, just before moving to the conclusion, to pause on Paula's, and by extension the syndicate of families' view on motherhood and work in the labor market. So while women in families are taken to be mothers, and I haven't elaborated on this, I'll just state it once again, they are expected to be mothers. Women in families are expected to be mothers. They're also expected to work. And I quote Paula, I would really be against women's emancipation that renounces to motherhood in the name of work. But in between brackets, not motherhood in general, because of course within the consecrated forms of life there is a renunciation to motherhood, so it is within the family. Right? So, women's emancipation that renounces to motherhood in the name of work, she continues, but why renounce to work in the name of motherhood, when the two can be combined? And of course, as we all know from in a feminist context, the question of combining motherhood and work is all that evident, remains all that evident in our societies. And of course, Paula knows that as well, and it is against that background and knowledge that she affirms her position militantly. And I quote, I want both, and I want them to be reconcilable. And it is possible to reconcile them through personal work, through personal choices and sacrifices, and through social struggles, because everything can be achieved if you work to achieve it. Of course, if one says it is impossible, so I renounce it, but that is not a choice. And women must know that they do not only have a choice to renounce. So here, her rejection of the choice argument with regard to women with children staying home interprets a dominant neoliberal framing of the tension between work and motherhood that suggests that women nowadays have the opportunity to choose between motherhood and work, or both, or part-time, or however they want it. But in the end, they remain individually accountable for the consequences of that choice. And while Paula uses a liberal language of individual responsibility, she is not prepared to accept a decision to renounce to either motherhood, because of course the renunciation goes both ways. She is not prepared to accept the decision to renounce to either motherhood or work as a real choice. Such a personal choice, she believed, is tied up to a structural reality which requires social struggles in order to reform that structural reality. So that both are totally combinable, that is her stake. Paula's articulation drew upon feminist discourse, which she actually acknowledged, probably because she also knew that me sitting in front of her, having announced myself as coming from women's studies, that she probably knew, she most likely knew she was talking to, that she was talking to a feminist, and that there was an issue of feminism here that I would bring up anyway. So she announced it before I even got there. This is a shared feminism, she said. And this is how she refers to the struggle for structural conditions which make the combination of work and motherhood possible, a shared feminism. Moreover, she considered the role of Catholic women in the struggle for women's emancipation and in women's struggle in general as an important one, as one that she referred to a number of times, the contribution of Catholic women within this struggle. Her references to shared feminism, however, are grounded in a distinction of a Catholic position on women's emancipation on the one hand and a feminist one on the other, or to take her own words seriously, because she does call herself in that sense a feminist, to distinguish between different types of feminism. Her genealogy situated Catholic women as the active ones, and now I quote, of course, not in struggles of pure feminist revendication, because there is a positive feminism that is shared, and there is a feminism that is only a bit of image and false emancipation. Negative feminism. So negative feminism is about women wanting to achieve masculine models. And we didn't go very explicitly into that, but with all the references, and by then I was able to read the discourse quite well, with all the references and the things that were going on at the very same time as we were having the interview in May 2002, which was a public debate concerning World Gay Pride in Rome, the negative feminism and the achieving masculine models that Paula was referring to was much less the kind of discussions that we know about women following masculine models if they want a career. It actually wasn't about that. It was once more about sexuality. It was basically about lesbian and gay sexuality. I need to conclude. Okay, I will conclude. Scholarship and feminist commentaries on women in religious movements and in so-called fundamentalist religious movements often either emphasize oppressive practices and oppressive theologies of such movements, or a bit more recently, and Chia has also referred to that, the agency of pious women as they carve out spaces of relatively empowerment within such movements. In my work, I am seeking for a different approach, not satisfied with a continuous listing of oppressive practices and ideologies, which, first of all, by now we know, and second of all, and this actually contradicts what I just said, many of them, in fact, do not precisely work as the imaginaries of oppressions that we do have. Like, for instance, in the story I just told you, ideas of a strong nuclear family, or pressure of women not to work and only be mothers, which are ideas that circulate about religious fundamentalist movements and gender, they do not work in the case of Comunione e Liberazione, as I hope to have shown you. But I'm also dissatisfied with what to my sense sometimes seems like a compulsory emphasis on agency, what needs to be And it raises a question for me, what needs to be proved in such an emphasis on agency? It's almost as if the liberal and secular notion of agency functions as a gatekeeper to a notion of humanity, in order to establish or to save someone's humanity. And to save the humanity of these fundamentalist women, we must make sure that their actions can be translated in the liberal secular language of agency. And my last example, my last quote and last example is a quote taken from a young woman, Marta, who was talking about the subject of choice, and also in the context of motherhood and work, and does it in a very different language than Paula does. Paula, of course, whose language was very tailored to, as she says herself, confront the state and confront the institutions, and in a sense play with liberal language. But Marta's language, as you will notice here, is very different. So Marta was talking about the confusion of what she calls the confusion of vocations that characterized contemporary society. And she was concretely referring to her own crisis at that moment of trying to find out if her vocation was to get married and establish a family, or if her vocation was to become a memories looming. And the confusion of vocations. She was horrified when she heard a colleague speak about the fact that family was a vocation, just like work, and that one had to choose between work or family. And now I quote her, "Something like that horrifies me, as if I have chosen as a vocation," and then she pauses. "Already the phrase does not function. I have chosen as a vocation. I have chosen the family as a vocation, and therefore I sacrifice work for the family." There is much confusion in such phrases. And here the confusion that she points to is what I'm recuperating here to point to this fact that that I'm dissatisfied with the recuperation and the domestication of certain of this religious discourse in a liberal, secular language of agency. Okay, the very last one. While meanwhile there has been an intervention in Saba Mahmoud, who among other things reconceptualized agency, aligning it more with the sociological understanding of agency as acting upon the world, in a way that questions and takes distance from progressive assumptions of acting upon the world in one's own interest and the expectations of what those own interests will be. And while I find Mahmoud's analytical distinction useful, I also find it does not go very far. So how do I propose to frame and engage, in this case, in this concrete case, the ethnographical material from Chiel, and in a larger sense, to think about women as so-called fundamentalist or neo-traditionalist movements? How to frame them, how to frame this material. I hope that I have shown that the movement that under discussion, Chiel, came into being shaped through various antagonisms and conflicts, and this is why in the beginning I took some time to say something about its history. So how it came into being through these conflicts and antagonisms, and how it also, of course, creates conflicts and stands in antagonism with other movements and with hegemonic cultural norms. I find it useful in this respect to think with Talal Assad's notion of tradition. So in this particular case, the tradition of Catholicism, and thinking it as a living tradition, as it is comprised of various dynamics, conflicts, antagonisms, instances of authority that are questioned, that are reproduced, emergence of new movements. And in such a process, what I'm interested in is how new subjectivities emerge. And I think I have shown a couple of them in the case of Chiel, the family as a renewed subjectivity, a universal soul devoid of sexual difference. This is the part I didn't really elaborate on, right? But think of the states. Universal soul devoid of sexual difference as a renewed subjectivity. The emphasis of the realization of the self in relationship with God as another kind of renewed subjectivity. And I have argued that these conflicts of sexual difference and gender and sexuality are at the very heart of how these subjectivities are shaped, albeit not in ways in which liberal secular mindsets often expect. And of course, the flight from sexual difference in virginity, in the saints, or the affirmation of traditional gender roles, or the invocation of a shared feminism, which stops at homosexuality, and radically stops there. All of these things, of course, are not truly new, and they are not truly unique. They are not unique to comunione di liberazione, but the articulation of it within a post-industrial society, in which, at least according to a theoretical and common sense ideas, religion was supposed to disappear, or at least stay quiet in the private sphere. This articulation is new. And then the question becomes, how does all of this push us to rethink our models and notions of subjectivity we rely on? And if the post-secular means anything, I mean, it means different things, or it means, there's a confusion there as well, it can mean different things, we're not really sure what it means, but if it means something for me, it means precisely this reconsideration of social and theory and feminist theory, which is usually secular, in the light of new kinds of religious subjectivities that these theoretical accounts up till now fail to account for, or account for in rather reduced ways. Okay, thank you.